London, October 1987. Michael Caine was walking through the underground passage connecting the Piccadilly and Central lines at Oxford Circus Station, his mind occupied with thoughts about an upcoming film project and the usual concerns that came with maintaining a successful acting career in an increasingly competitive industry. The evening rush hour was in full swing, with thousands of commuters hurrying through the tunnels toward their various destinations, creating the familiar symphony of footsteps, conversations, and the distant rumble of approaching trains that defined London's underground experience. But as Michael navigated through the crowd, something stopped him in his tracks, the hauntingly beautiful sound of violin music echoing through the tunnel, played with such skill and emotion that it seemed to transform the harsh, utilitarian space into something approaching a concert hall. What he was about to discover about the blind musician creating this extraordinary music would not only bring him to tears, but reveal a connection to his own past that would transform his understanding of loyalty, memory, and the invisible bonds that can connect human lives across decades of separation and loss. Street musicians were a common sight in London's underground stations, and Michael had passed hundreds of them over the years without giving them more than passing attention. Most were competent but unremarkable performers, trying to earn a few pounds from the constant stream of pedestrian traffic that flowed through the subway system. But the music he was hearing now was different. This was the work of a trained, accomplished musician whose technical skill and emotional depth elevated his performance far above the typical busker's repertoire. The violinist was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, sitting on a small folding stool near the entrance to the Central Line platform. He was completely absorbed in his music. His face turned upward as if he was listening to something beyond the notes he was producing. His violin case lay open at his feet, containing a modest collection of coins and a few pound notes contributed by passing commuters who had been moved by his performance. What struck Michael immediately was not just the quality of the man's playing, but the repertoire he had chosen. Instead of the popular songs or classical standards that most street musicians relied upon, this man was performing pieces that seemed deeply personal, melodies that carried weight and meaning that went beyond mere entertainment. Michael found himself stopping to listen, drawn by something indefinable about the music that seemed to reach past his usual defenses and touch something fundamental about memory, loss, and the bittersweet nature of human experience. The musician was blind, Michael realized, noting the white cane propped against the tunnel wall and the distinctive way the man's unseeing eyes moved as he played. His blindness didn't diminish his performance in any way. If anything, it seemed to intensify his connection to the music, as if the absence of sight had heightened his other senses and allowed him to channel emotions that sighted musicians might never access. As Michael stood listening, the violinist transitioned into a new piece, and suddenly Michael felt as if the floor had shifted beneath him. The melody was achingly familiar, stirring memories that he hadn't accessed in decades, but he couldn't immediately place where he had heard it before. The tune was simple but profound, with a lilting quality that spoke of lullabies and childhood comfort. It was the kind of melody that seemed to carry all the tenderness and protection that a loving parent could provide, wrapped in notes that conveyed safety, warmth, and unconditional love. Michael found himself transported back to his childhood in the East End of London, lying in a small bed in a cramped flat while his father sang softly to help him fall asleep. The memory was so vivid and unexpected that he felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. It had been his father's lullaby, a simple melody that Maurice Micklewhite had sung to Michael and his younger brother Stanley every night during their early childhood. Michael hadn't heard that tune in over 40 years, hadn't thought about those bedtime moments in decades, but now the music was bringing back every detail: the feel of his father's calloused hand stroking his hair, the sound of his voice humming the melody even after the words had ended, the absolute security that came from knowing his father was there to keep him safe. But how could this elderly street musician possibly know a melody that Michael had thought was unique to his family? A simple song that his father had probably made up or learned from his own parents in the working-class neighborhoods of London. Michael approached the violinist, waiting until the man had finished the piece before speaking. "Excuse me," Michael said gently, not wanting to startle the musician. "That was beautiful. The last song you played? Where did you learn it?" The violinist turned toward the sound of Michael's voice, and Michael could see intelligence and alertness in the man's unseeing eyes. "Thank you," the musician said, his voice carrying the same working-class London accent that Michael remembered from his own childhood. "That melody, it's very special to me. I learned it from a friend many years ago." "Could you tell me about that friend?" Michael asked, sensing that there was a story worth hearing. The musician seemed to consider whether to share what was clearly a personal memory with a stranger, then apparently decided that the quality of Michael's attention deserved an honest response. "My name is Harry Richardson," he said, "and the friend who taught me that song was one of the finest men I ever knew. His name was Maurice Micklewhite." Michael felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The musician had just mentioned his father's name, his father's actual name, not his stage name, but the name Maurice had been born with and carried throughout his life. "Maurice Micklewhite was your friend?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was," Harry said, with obvious affection. "We served together during the war in the Royal Fusiliers. Joined up on the same day in 1939, trained together, shipped out to North Africa together, fought side by side for 5 years. Harry's expression grew distant as he recalled those memories. "Maurice saved my life more times than I can count. We looked out for each other the way soldiers do when they're in combat together. But Maurice was special. He looked out for everyone in our unit. He was the kind of man who would give you his last cigarette, share his rations when you hadn't eaten, write letters home for men who couldn't write themselves." Michael was struggling to process what he was hearing. This man had not only known his father but had served with him throughout the war, had witnessed the courage and character that Michael had only heard about secondhand. "Harry," Michael said carefully, "what happened to Maurice? Did you stay in touch after the war?" Harry's expression grew sad, and he shook his head. "I lost touch with him in 1943. He said, "We were in Italy, fighting in the mountains near Monte Cassino. There was an explosion. German artillery shell landed right next to our position. The blast took my sight permanently and sent me back to England for medical treatment." Harry paused, clearly emotional about the memory. "Maurice was supposed to write to me once I got back to London, let me know how the unit was doing, but I never heard from him. I assumed, well, in those days when you didn't hear from someone, you usually assumed the worst." "Harry," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "Maurice didn't die in the war. He came home, got married, had children. He lived until 1955. Harry's face showed a mixture of joy and regret. "He survived? He made it home?" "He did," Michael confirmed. "And Harry, I think there's something you should know. My name is Michael Caine. But I was born Michael Micklewhite. Maurice was my father." The impact of this revelation on Harry was immediate and profound. His hands began to shake, and he carefully set his violin down in his lap. "You're Maurice's boy?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Maurice's son?" "I am," Michael said. "And that lullaby you were playing, he sang it to me every night when I was a child." Harry reached out with his hand, and Michael took it, both men overcome by the extraordinary coincidence that had brought them together after more than 40 years. "Maurice told me about that song," Harry said, tears streaming down his face. "During the war, when things were particularly bad and men were missing their families, Maurice would hum that melody to help people feel less alone. He said it was the song he planned to sing to his children when he got home." Harry's grip on Michael's hand tightened. He talked about his family constantly. His wife Ellen, the son he barely knew because the boy was so young when he left for the war. He carried a photograph of you in his helmet, a little boy with serious eyes who looked exactly like his father. Michael was overwhelmed by this new perspective on his father's war service and his love for his family. "He never talked much about the war when I was growing up," Michael said. "I knew he had served, but he never shared details about what he had experienced or who he had served with." "That was Maurice," Harry said with understanding. He believed in leaving the war behind when he came home. He used to say that families deserved the best parts of the men who returned, not the parts that had been damaged by combat. Harry picked up his violin again, holding it carefully. Every time I play that melody, I think about Maurice. I think about the conversations we had about the families we were fighting for, the dreams we had for the lives we would build when the war was over. Playing that song has been my way of keeping his memory alive for all these years. Michael realized that this man had been honoring his father's memory through music for decades, performing a daily act of remembrance and tribute that had kept Maurice's spirit alive in ways that Michael had never known about. "Harry," Michael said, "would you play the song again? I'd like to hear it the way my father's friend plays it." Harry raised his violin to his chin and began to play the familiar melody, but now Michael heard it with completely different ears. This wasn't just a childhood lullaby, it was a piece of his father's war experience, a bridge between the man who had fought for his country and the man who had come home to raise his children. As the music filled the underground tunnel, Michael found himself crying openly, not just for the beauty of the performance, but for the realization that his father had carried this melody through some of the darkest moments in human history, that it had provided comfort to soldiers far from home, and that it had survived to bring comfort to a new generation. When Harry finished playing, both men sat in the companionable silence that often follows profound musical experiences. "Harry," Michael said finally, "I can't believe you've been here all this time playing my father's song, keeping his memory alive, and I never knew. Life has a way of bringing people together when they need to find each other," Harry said philosophically. "I've been playing music in these tunnels for 15 years, ever since my wife died, and I needed something to give my days structure and purpose. I never expected to meet Maurice's son, but I'm grateful that music brought us together." Michael learned that Harry had lost his sight during the war but had gone on to live a full life, marrying his childhood sweetheart, raising 3 children, and working as a piano tuner and music teacher until his retirement. Music had been his constant companion, providing both career and comfort throughout the decades. "After my wife Margaret passed away in 1972, I felt lost for the first time since losing my sight," Harry explained. "Our children were grown and living their own lives, and I needed something to fill the empty hours. I remembered how music had gotten me through the difficult times after I was injured in the war, so I decided to take up the violin again." Harry had taught himself to play violin during his long recovery from his war injuries, using music as both therapy and expression for emotions that were too complex for words. "I started playing in the underground tunnels because that's where I felt most comfortable," Harry said. "The acoustics are wonderful, and there's something about the anonymity of it that appeals to me. People can listen or not listen, contribute or not contribute, but the music exists regardless." Michael was moved by Harry's resilience and his dedication to creating beauty in the world despite the challenges he had faced. "Harry," Michael said, "I want you to know that my father would be incredibly proud to know that his friend became such an accomplished musician, and I want to make sure you never have to play in subway tunnels again unless you choose to." Harry looked puzzled by this statement. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're family now," Michael said firmly. "You were my father's friend. You've honored his memory for decades, and you've kept part of him alive through your music. That makes you family." Michael explained his position in the entertainment industry and his ability to help Harry in practical ways, but more importantly, he expressed his desire to have Harry become part of his life and his family's life. "I don't need charity," Harry said with dignity. "I've gotten along fine on my own." "This isn't charity," Michael replied. "This is family taking care of family. My father took care of you during the war, and now I want to take care of you in peacetime." Over the following months, Michael gradually introduced Harry into his family's life, beginning with quiet dinners and progressing to holiday celebrations and special occasions. Harry's presence provided a direct connection to Maurice that Michael had thought was lost forever. "Having Harry with us is like having a piece of Dad back," Michael told his wife Shakira. "Harry remembers things about Dad that no one else knows. His sense of humor, his kindness, his courage under pressure. Harry's stories about Maurice during the war gave Michael a new understanding of his father's character and the experiences that had shaped the man who had raised him. "Your father was the bravest man I ever knew," Harry told Michael during one of their conversations. "Not because he was fearless. Everyone was afraid during combat, but because he did what needed to be done regardless of his fear. And he never lost his humanity, never stopped caring about the men around him." These insights helped Michael understand the source of the values his father had instilled in him: the importance of helping others, the need to remain decent regardless of circumstances, and the responsibility that comes with success and privilege. Harry's musical talents also enriched the family's life in unexpected ways. He began giving violin lessons to Michael's children, sharing not just technical skills but the emotional and spiritual dimensions of musical expression. "Music isn't just about playing the right notes," Harry would tell them during lessons. "It's about communicating feelings that are too deep for words, about connecting with something larger than yourself." Harry's influence on Michael's approach to his career was equally significant. The older man's perspective on art, service, and the importance of using one's talents to bring beauty into the world influenced Michael's choice of roles and his approach to his craft. "Harry taught me that every performance is an opportunity to honor something important," Michael reflected. "Whether you're playing violin in a subway tunnel or acting in a film, you have the chance to touch people's lives, to remind them of what's good and meaningful in the world." This philosophy influenced Michael's work in films like Educating Rita and The Cider House Rules, where he chose roles that explored themes of education, personal growth, and the ways that people can lift each other up through encouragement and support. Harry's death in 1995, at the age of 81, marked the end of a friendship that had spanned both war and peace, loss and rediscovery. In his final weeks, Harry was cared for in Michael's home, surrounded by the family that had adopted him and honored him as the keeper of Maurice's memory. "At the end, Harry was at peace," Michael said at the funeral. "He had lived to see Maurice's son grow up successfully, had shared his stories about my father's courage and character, and had passed on the music that connected us across generations." The funeral service featured performances of the lullaby that had brought Michael and Harry together, played by musicians whom Harry had taught over the years. The simple melody that Maurice had carried through the war and Harry had preserved through decades of street performance became a celebration of memory, friendship, and the power of music to transcend time and circumstance. In the years following Harry's death, Michael established the Harry Richardson Music Foundation, which provides instruments and instruction to visually impaired musicians and supports programs that use music as therapy for veterans dealing with war trauma. "Harry showed me that music has the power to heal, to connect, and to preserve what's most important about human experience," Michael explained when announcing the foundation. "Supporting musical education and therapy seems like the perfect way to honor his memory and continue his work." The foundation has provided hundreds of instruments to visually impaired musicians, funded music therapy programs at veterans' hospitals, and supported street musicians who, like Harry, use their talents to bring beauty into urban environments. Michael also commissioned a composer to create a formal arrangement of the lullaby that had connected him to Harry, creating a piece that could be performed by orchestras and chamber groups as a tribute to the men who had served together during World War II. "That simple melody carries the weight of an entire generation's experience," Michael said when the piece premiered. "It represents the love that motivated men to fight, the hope that sustained them during dark times, and the connections that bind families and friends across decades of separation." Today, more than 30 years after his encounter with Harry in the Oxford Circus Underground station, Michael continues to support street musicians and advocates for the recognition of their art as a legitimate and valuable form of cultural expression. "Harry taught me that art isn't defined by the venue where it's performed," Michael said in a recent interview. "Some of the most profound musical experiences I've ever had have taken place in subway tunnels, on street corners, and in other unofficial venues where musicians are sharing their gifts with anyone who cares to listen." The chance meeting between a successful actor and a blind street musician became a powerful reminder that the most meaningful connections in life often happen when we least expect them, and that the bonds forged through shared experience and mutual respect can transcend decades, circumstances, and even death itself. When Michael Caine heard the blind violinist playing his father's lullaby in that London underground tunnel, he discovered not just a connection to his own past, but a living testament to the power of loyalty, memory, and music to preserve what's most precious about human relationships across time and circumstance. Harry Richardson had spent decades honoring Maurice Micklewhite's memory through daily performances of a simple melody, keeping alive the spirit of a friendship that had sustained two young men through the crucible of war. Their reunion through music became a celebration of the invisible bonds that connect us all, and a reminder that love, loyalty, and beauty can survive and flourish even in the most unlikely places. But the impact of Michael and Harry's reunion extended far beyond their personal relationship, touching the lives of countless other people who were inspired by their story and motivated to examine their own connections to family, memory, and the power of art to transcend time and circumstance. Harry's transition from street musician to honored family member became a powerful example of how circumstances can change dramatically when people recognize and act upon their shared humanity. For 15 years, thousands of commuters had passed Harry in the underground tunnels, perhaps dropping a coin into his violin case, but never imagining that this elderly man possessed stories and connections that could transform lives. Harry taught me that we never know who we're encountering in our daily lives. Michael reflected in interviews about their relationship. The person sitting next to you on the subway, the clerk at the grocery store, the musician playing on the street corner. Any of them might have extraordinary stories, valuable wisdom, or connections to your own history that could enrich your life in ways you can't imagine. This perspective influenced Michael's interactions with people in all walks of life, making him more curious about others' stories and more willing to engage in conversations with strangers who might have interesting experiences to share. The story of Harry's musical preservation of Maurice's memory also highlighted the role that art plays in maintaining connections between past and present. Harry's daily performances of the lullaby had kept Maurice's spirit alive, not just in Harry's own memory, but in the public space where anyone might hear and be moved by the melody. Music has a unique power to carry emotional and spiritual content across time, observed Dr. Sarah Williams, a musicologist at the Royal College of Music, who studied the social impact of street performance. Harry's decision to perform Maurice's lullaby in public spaces meant that Maurice's love for his family was being expressed and shared with strangers every day, creating a kind of ongoing tribute that enriched the urban environment. The relationship between Michael and Harry also demonstrated the particular challenges and resilience of war veterans who had sustained life-changing injuries during their service. Harry's loss of sight in 1943 had required him to completely restructure his life and career, but he had done so with remarkable adaptability and determination. "Losing my sight was devastating initially," Harry had told Michael during one of their conversations, "but I discovered that blindness also opened up new forms of perception and expression. Music became more important to me after I lost my sight because it became my primary way of connecting with beauty and emotion." Harry's experience illustrated the ways that people can transform trauma and limitation into sources of strength and creativity, using their challenges as motivation for developing new skills and finding new purposes. "Harry showed me that resilience isn't just about surviving difficult experiences," Michael said. "It's about finding ways to use those experiences to create something beautiful and meaningful that can benefit other people." This insight influenced Michael's portrayal of characters who faced adversity in his films, helping him bring depth and authenticity to roles that explored themes of recovery, adaptation, and the discovery of new purposes after loss. The musical education that Harry provided to Michael's children also had lasting effects on their development and their understanding of art as a form of communication and healing. "Harry taught us that music wasn't just entertainment," Natasha Caine said years later. "He showed us how music could carry memories, express emotions that were too complex for words, and connect people across generations and experiences. The children's violin lessons with Harry became exercises in discipline, patience, and emotional expression that influenced their approach to challenges throughout their lives. Harry had a way of teaching that went beyond technical instruction, Dominique recalled. He taught us to listen deeply, not just to music but to life itself. He showed us how to pay attention to the subtle emotions and connections that most people miss. The foundation established in Harry's memory became one of the most successful organizations supporting blind musicians. Within 10 years, it had provided instruments to over 500 musicians and funded music therapy programs at dozens of hospitals. Harry's story inspired thousands to support musical education programs, said Foundation Director Margaret Collins. Donors understood they were contributing to a tradition of using music to heal and connect. The annual Harry Richardson Memorial Concert became one of London's anticipated cultural events, featuring performances by musicians influenced by Harry's story. The concerts raised funds while celebrating music's power to connect people across differences. Michael's participation in these concerts demonstrated his commitment to using his celebrity status to support causes that aligned with Harry's values. The impact of Harry's story on Michael's film career was equally profound. Beginning in the late 1980s, Michael became much more selective about the roles he accepted, gravitating toward projects that explored themes of redemption, connection, and the ways that people could lift each other up through art and mutual support. After meeting Harry, I realized that every story I chose to tell was an opportunity to honor something important, Michael said. I wanted to be part of projects that celebrated human resilience, creativity, and the capacity for love to transcend time and circumstance. This philosophical shift led to some of Michael's most acclaimed performances in films like The Cider House Rules, where his character demonstrated how wisdom and moral authority could exist independently of formal education or social status, about Schmidt, where he explored themes of aging, loss, and the search for meaning in life's later chapters. Directors and screenwriters began seeking out Michael for roles that required actors who could convey depth, wisdom, and emotional authenticity. Recognizing that his real-life experiences with people like Harry had given him insights into character development that went beyond technical acting skills. Michael brings something special to roles that involve intergenerational relationships or characters dealing with loss and recovery, observed director Lasse Hallström. He understands that grief and healing are complex processes that require patience, compassion, and the willingness to remain open to unexpected sources of comfort and wisdom. The relationship between Michael and Harry also influenced academic research into the social and psychological benefits of street performance and public art. Sociologists and urban planners began studying how street musicians like Harry contributed to community building, cultural preservation, and the creation of shared spaces where strangers could encounter beauty and meaning in their daily lives. Harry's story illustrates how street performance can serve functions that go far beyond entertainment, said Dr. Patricia Chen, an urban sociologist who studied the role of public art in community development. Street musicians create gathering points where people can pause, reflect, and connect with experiences that remind them of their shared humanity. This research supported policy changes in cities throughout Europe and North America that provided better support and protection for street performers, recognizing their contribution to urban culture and community well-being. 20 years after their first meeting in the Oxford Circus tunnel, Michael established a memorial to Harry in the form of a small performance space in the underground station where they had encountered each other. The Harry Richardson Memorial Stage provides a dedicated area where musicians can perform with proper acoustics. Harry spent 15 years bringing music to this tunnel, Michael said at the dedication ceremony. It seems fitting that his memory should be honored in the place where he created so much beauty. Today, the melody that Maurice sang to his young son and that Harry preserved through decades of street performance continues to be played by musicians around the world. The simple lullaby has become a symbol of how love, loyalty, and artistic expression can transcend individual lives. Michael continues to support street musicians and advocates for public performance as valuable cultural expression that enriches urban life and provides opportunities for unexpected encounters. Meeting Harry taught me that the most important moments in life often happen when we're not looking for them, Michael said. The willingness to stop, listen, and engage with people we encounter can lead to discoveries that transform our understanding of ourselves and our connections to others.